we are discussing a very important topic, gender mainstreaming and gender sensitization. In this session, you will be understanding the need and the importance of gender mainstreaming. You will become aware of gender issues in agriculture and allied sectors. You will identify suitable strategies and activities for addressing the gender concerns in agriculture. We all are aware that women have a very central role in agriculture. We know what's the difference between sex and gender, how we see sex in a biological connotation, how we see gender as in the social perspective. Well, women, they undertake a wide range of activities relating to food production. We are all aware of that, in processing and as well as in marketing. And statistics say that rural women in particular are responsible for half of the world's food production. And they produce between 60 to 80% of the food in most of the developing countries. It's around 50% worldwide, and it's 60 to 80% in most of the developing countries. Well, we are also aware that the important role played by the rural women in agriculture, this has been largely ignored in government statistics and decision making. This situation is much better in the last 2 or 3 decades. But still we find that the recent developments of the better situation of the last 2 or 3 decades, this may be endangered, one, by the fact that there's an over-commercialization of agriculture. Number 2 is the rural development activities these days are being increasingly entrusted to private players who may not be aware, who may not be sensitized enough on the role of gender development. With this background, let us see some of the key facts of women in India. But some of the key facts we have in India. In 2008, we found that women comprised 28% of the economically active population. So of this economically active population, 63% worked in agriculture alone. And this contribution, the contribution of the women in farm production has already been estimated at 55 to 66%, a whopping 55 to 66% in farm production. Well, but still the situation is that the FAO statistics reveals that women account for just 9.21% of the total 119 lakh farm land holders or farm land owners in our country. So that's a very disturbing statistic we have. Less than 10% of women owning land in the country. Well, the possible reasons for this may be that many of the socio-cultural factors are there, the practice of female seclusion, many legal constraints are there, and so on and so forth. Well, even when we find that even when women enjoy ownership rights, we have come across instances where they do not exercise effective control over land. Well, what are the issues in this? We'll see one by one what are the issues in this. Number 1 is women. They may be the world's principal food producers, and they may be the principal food providers, but still they remain invisible partners in development. So that is the situation now. Well, one of the major problems, why is this situation? Why are they invisible partners in development? The major problem may be the lack of gender disaggregated data. So that is the breaking down of data based on gender, men and women over the years. This is the major problem we see. And because of this, we find that the women's contribution to agriculture in particular is very poorly understood in the country. And their specific needs, the women's specific needs are ignored in development planning. Well, take for instance the design of farm tools. We see that many of the farm tools are not women friendly. So that is a case in point. Well, unless we realize the full potential of women in agriculture, the goal of 1996 World Food Summit, which said that we need to bring down the number of hungry people in the world by half by the year 2015, this we may not achieve at all. And with these issues in mind, we will see what mainstreaming gender is all about and how mainstreaming gender can tackle all these issues. Now, what is gender mainstreaming, right? As they say, gender equality is the goal and gender mainstreaming is the strategy. This concept of gender mainstreaming was first proposed at the 1985 Third World Conference that was held in Nairobi. And in order to achieve greater equality between women and men, so we require changes in at least 4 levels. That's one is changes in attitudes and relationships. Number 2, changes in institutions and legal frameworks. Number 3, changes in economic institutions. And finally, number 4, changes in political decision-making processes. Well, thus, what we can say is the ultimate goal of gender mainstreaming is to achieve gender equality. So, gender mainstreaming is a strategy to achieve the goal of gender equality. Well, we see some of the concepts in this gender mainstreaming. One is feminization of agriculture. Well, statistics say that men are gradually moving out of agriculture into other sectors. And by and large, women remain at the farm gradually, so this leads to feminizing the agricultural labor force. So that is one issue in this. And in the recent 2010-11 agricultural census, this census says that nearly 15 million farmers, we are less by 15 million farmers from 1991, which means that we have lost 15 million farmers. So the major cause of this phenomenon is that the migration of men from rural areas to towns and cities in their own countries or abroad in search of paid employment. That is one reason why the population of the main cultivators, the farmers, have come down in the last decade. Now, as men's participation in agriculture declines due to these reasons and factors, the role of women in agricultural production becomes even more dominant. And statistics still say that in our country, the percentage of women-headed households account for a good percentage of 10.4%. That's really an appreciable percentage. This emphasizes the emerging role of women in farm activities. There are 10.4% households in the country are headed by women. Well, on the other hand, the increased feminization of agricultural work and agricultural labor, this means that the concentration of women is increasing in a sector, that is the farm sector, which is already experiencing a decline. So that is again an issue. Another concept is the gender division of labor. Well, the division of labor between men and women, that is who does what men do and what women do in crop production. This varies considerably from country to country, region to region, and community to community. However, it is usually we see that men who plow the fields and they drive draught animals, while the women, they do the major share of sowing, weeding, and they apply fertilizers, pesticides, harvesting, and threshing. So that is what largely, predominantly women have been doing. And in spite of this often complementary roles in agriculture, we also find that in almost all societies, women tend to work longer hours than men. So that is one aspect we need to look into. The division of labor between genders, I would say, it still remains poorly understood. So this is because much of the women's work in crop production consists of unpaid labor. We can call it as unpaid labor in fields that produce for the household rather than for the market for commercial reasons. So as a result of this, women's work in the field, it goes unrecorded in statistics in many of the development programs. And this has been well documented. You can see in a FAO booklet. Sometime back there was an issue, a FAO issue written by our own environmentalist Vandana Shiva, that was titled "Most Farmers in India Are Women." So you can just have a look at that publication, an FAO publication. That will give an interesting account of why she has the point that most of the farmers in India are women. Well, another issue here is the extension support for women farmers. Well, we have been, so all through the years, over the years, there are so many extension activities going on in our country, and in most of the developing countries as well. So in all the developing countries, so it's a common practice to direct extension and training services primarily towards men. Okay, a recent FAO survey, it shows that the female farmers receive only 5%. I repeat, it's only 5% of all the agricultural extension services worldwide, and only 15% of the world's extension agents are women, so the rest are men. Well, this is something that needs to be looked into. And for long, our extension policies and programs, they have been, all the policies and programs have been based on the assumption, which has been proved wrong by many of the studies conducted worldwide, that information conveyed by to the male head of the family, to the male head of the household, this will be automatically passed on to its female members. But more often we find that this is not the case. The men do not necessarily, they neither discuss production decisions with their wives, nor they transfer any extension knowledge to the female members of the family. So that is the case in point. And further, policymakers, in fact, they fail to recognize that the extension needs of men and women may differ. So the extension needs may differ between men and women. So how is that? Now, one is the extension services, they usually focus on commercial aspects, the commercial production aspects, rather than on subsistence crops. Okay, so which are the primary concern of most of the women farmers, the rural women, because since they are more, and this is the key to food security in developing countries. So we tend to ignore the subsistence crops, the subsistence farming per se. Well, and change agents, we find that they always choose to work with very few progressive farmers. So that has been the case all through the years. They tend to neglect the resource poor and the landless farmers. This includes the women. And this is one of the arguments people play, the sociologists place against the Green Revolution, which we witnessed in the late 90s. Well, to compound this problem, this particular problem, extension meetings, many of the campaigns and all, so they are often scheduled at times when the women farmers are unable to attend. So maybe they'll be busy with their household activities, household responsibilities, though the timings are not always right, the timings are not always women friendly. Well, in this case, the ICTs can be, the information and communication technologies can be seen as a possible solution in making rural women information rich. But still, we need to go a long way in order to the women to take their place alongside the men as full participants. So that is the thing we need to look about. Well, let us see some of the gender issues which we witness in agriculture, specifically agriculture as such. Well, the first thing is overburden of work. So that we have seen, and which needs to be looked into primarily. That is, the rural women are much more overburdened than the men, owing to their very multiple occupations. So they play several roles, multiple roles the women play. And the research in women in agriculture have revealed that on an average, women work for nearly 15 to 16 hours a day. So it's mind-blowing, We have only 24 hours a day, maybe apart from sleeping. This research shows that the women are working, the women in agriculture are working all through the day. So the studies even point out that the farm activities which are time and labor sensitive, most of the activities which are time sensitive, intensive, labor intensive, which are monotonous, which are repetitive, and which are more drudgery prone. So these are generally performed by women rather than men. Well, to illustrate this point, you can just have a look at this picture. So this picture clearly illustrates how a woman is overburdened by many of the problems that plague a woman, a rural woman, the status of rural women, a woman for that matter, in India. So you can see how many roles she plays, how many problems she faces. So that is a case of overburden of work. And she is always in chains, as the picture says. Well, the next issue is the impact of modern agricultural technologies on women. Now, what may be the impact? So that naturally we will be thinking that, or will be under the notion that this has to be on the positive side. So let us see whether this has created any positive impact on women as such. Well, some of the modern technologies, unfortunately, we find that they have affected farm women adversely. So like for instance, if a farm technology leads to multiple cropping, the workload for women increases. That has been the result of so many studies conducted worldwide. and green revolution in our own country, which saw the introduction of many new technologies, innovative technologies, modern technologies, had many of the small women farmers, small farm holders who were women. So they started losing their lands, and in fact many joined the ranks of wage earners. So this has been an unfortunate result of green revolution. And a number of tasks performed by males have been mechanized. We find that many of mechanization is the rule of the day. But still, many tasks allotted to women, we find that they continue to be manual, and women suffer from drudgery. So even where improved technologies are available for women's activities, there is very little scope or very little access for training the rural women. So now why is training, or why is capacity building of rural women so important? Well, we should know why we need to invest in the capacity building of farm women, why at all training farm women is important. Well, statistics say that if the women had the same access to productive resources as men, they could increase yields, they could increase crop yields on their farms by a whopping 20 to 30%. So only in the recent past, the need for capacity building and the skill upgradation of farm women is receiving the priority it deserves. We see that special extension and technology dissemination programs exclusively for women are being advocated and implemented by international agencies like FAO and many national agencies as well. Well, to move on to the gender analysis, another important concept of gender mainstreaming. Well, what is gender analysis? It's the first and foremost critical step step forward towards gender responsive planning and programming. Say if you are with a development related organization, one of the first tasks will be you need to collect and analyze sex disaggregated data or information. So that is the priority. So we have several frameworks. We have with us many frameworks and methodologies conducted abroad as well as in the country to conduct gender analysis. And then the next is gender budgeting. So we saw what gender analysis was. Now what is gender budgeting? Gender budgeting is a dissection of the government budget. That is, how the translating the gender commitments into budgetary commitments. So thus, gender budgeting looks at the government budget from a gender perspective to assess how the budget addresses the needs of women in the areas like health, education, employment, and etc. So this doesn't mean that there should be a separate budget based on gender. We don't say that, but we need to take action or an affirmative action to address the specific needs of women in the budget. So we can appropriately call this as whether it is a gender responsive budget. Well, what are the guidelines now for mainstreaming gender? So this can be done at 3 stages. One is at the project formulation and design stage. The other one, the number 2 is project implementation and monitoring stage. And the third one is at project review and evaluation stage. So the first thing is project formulation and design, where we need to ensure that the gender is addressed at the fact-finding mission and developing the concept paper itself. Number 2 is project implementation and monitoring. Here we need to involve gender specialists, and we have to consult with the women's groups during the project implementation stage. And the third one is the project review and evaluation stage. Here also we need to ensure that the program staff, they understand and apply gender indicators in the success of or evaluation of any development program. So then what are the strategies for mainstreaming gender? So we need to know about that. Number 1 is we need to organize women's groups, right? So an excellent initiative in this regard is the government facilitated self-help groups in our countries, in many of the developing countries, that was initiated in the early 90s. So and then number 2 is we need to develop technologies and facilities for women to reduce energy and time spent on the household and farm production activities. A case in point is the community kitchens, which is coming up. This concept is coming up, that prevail in many parts of Rajasthan and Gujarat among certain communities. The concept of community kitchens. Well, the third thing we can say is it's a need for more biomass production to meet the fuel needs of the poor, the resource poor. So this helps women in saving a lot of time, and they can devote this time for other entrepreneurial and income generating activities. We also need to develop innovative credit programs, right? The women credit management groups of many NGOs, like Myrada is an example. So where women have easy access to credit. We also need to identify the right training and extension needs of women before initiating any development program. So that is one point we need to, there is one strategy which we need to keep it in mind when we are developing strategies for mainstreaming gender. So to sum up this session, so in this session we discussed the need and importance of mainstreaming gender, the key facts of women in India, the rural women in India, the issues that concern gender development like feminization of agriculture, gender division of labor, and extension support to the women farmers, and then many gender issues in agriculture. We also saw how to go about in the gender analysis and gender budgeting we also saw, and finally we saw the guidelines and strategies for mainstreaming gender. Well, before we wind up the session, have a look at this slide. You can see the status of women then during the early 1900s. So this photo, the cover page of an extension bulletin from Colorado Agricultural College, you can see what is said. It says, so books for the farmer's wife, which assumes the farmer to be a male. So now, it's not the case now, at least this is not the case now. You can see how much importance the UNO gives for by having the phrase here. You can see, just have a look at the slide, African farmer and her husband. So which means that they assume here the farmer to be a woman. So so on that positive note, so we wind up the session. Thank you, friends. Thank you and good luck.